Welcome back. We got a little sidetracked at our house for a week or so, but I'm glad to be back, and I'm glad you're back. The story is told of an absent-minded scholar who was riding a train one day, totally absorbed in his reading. The conductor walked down the aisle and asked for his ticket. The scholar frantically searched his pockets. He couldn't find it. Frantically, he checked his pockets again. I had some experiences like that. He still could not find his ticket. So the conductor said kindly, "Never mind, sir. When you find it, mail it to the company. I'm certain you have it." The scholar shot back in panic. "I know I have it, but what I want to know is, where in the world am I going?" The poor man had forgotten where he was headed. It is very possible to forget where we are headed, to lose sight of our destination. It is possible to become so absorbed in the present that the future is obscure. But we want to keep track of where we're going. We're heading heavenward, and we don't want to get off track, and we don't want to lose our ticket either. The blood of Jesus. And here's another little interesting one. Couldn't you just wait 5 minutes with me? Couldn't you just sit 5 minutes with me? My husband asked. The wistful tone of his voice stopped me short. But we're together all the time. Since you've retired, I protested, and I've got so many chores to do. Just 5 minutes of your undivided time, he repeated. So, masking my impatience with a smile, I sat down with him on the couch, wondering what to say. I got my head back and waited. I put my head back and waited. There were curtains to hang, washing, ironing, dusting, but he said nothing, only sat in pleased silence. Gradually, as the minutes ticked by, I began to reflect on our 40 years together, our hopes and dreams. Some had been realized. We had grandsons to enjoy. For all our worries, most things had turned out well. He'd been a provident, faithful husband, provident, faithful husband, never dull. We had a comfortable home, a certain amount of security. God had blessed us. I found myself thinking of a widow friend who'd give much to share an hour with like this. Wasn't there a lesson for me here? One day, I might wish I'd been more considerate. I hadn't kept him always on top of my list of priorities. That's what my husband thinks sometimes, too. How unrewarding those demanding household chores really were. How undemanding this companion. Under his hand, mine turned, fingers linking and squeezing. The oven timer sounded. He stirred. "Thanks," my husband said. It had been a half an hour we'd sat there. I rose refreshed. "Invite me more often," I smiled, wondering where all my tensions had gone. Is that a beautiful little story? Tidbit. Anyhow, here's my story. My "you've got to be kidding" prayers. Now, before I start this story, written by Nancy Costa, just how far would God go to answer me? I want you to know that I'm very much anti-lottery. No lottery for me. But anyway, listen to the story. One time in my life stands out in my mind like no other. Only one phrase describes it. It was the worst of times. It was the best of times. My husband and I had just entered the ministry. in our early 20s and newly arrived in the United States from Argentina. We were new not only to the ministry, but also to the country and the people to whom we would be ministering. Although the members of our congregation spoke our language, Spanish, their accent and their customs were so different to understand as those of English-speaking counterparts. To top it off, we were on a stipend salary, not a full salary, with a couple suitcases to our name. Our questions, God's answers. Not a week went by that I didn't question our decision to remain in the United States. We had felt God's leading. My husband Robert had undergone minor surgery on his leg in South America, and what had promised to be an overnight hospital stay had turned into months of hospitalization. After his release, his leg was worse than before, except that now he was in constant pain. Once athletic and active, now Robert had no mobility in his foot, which was sensitive to the slightest touch. A doctor in the United States had hinted he might be able to help, but we didn't have the funds to get there. Then, miraculously, a doctor from France, how God works, we didn't even know, sent us the money. Before we knew it, Robert was in the United States undergoing corrective surgery. This was followed by lengthy physical therapy. That's when the call came to stay in America. We prayed about it. We had jobs waiting for us at home. Robert had been called as boys' dean and Bible teacher at River Plate College. And I, too, in the administration office. But God's answer seemed to be, stay. God had worked for us in this country. Robert had no doubts. He had always been his dream to live in the United States, and he felt God had opened the way. I, on the other hand, missed my family, my friends, and the way of life that I'd known. One Friday evening, we were driving to visit a family with whom we had been studying the Bible. I wasn't feeling well, and I asked Robert to drop me off at the church, which was nearby. I would rest there and wait for him. I sat alone in the church for what seemed like hours, alone with God and my thoughts. I told him everything I was feeling. We had no money, no furniture, no family, no friends, not even a piano. I had grown up with music. Right now in my parents' home, I thought, they're probably welcoming the Sabbath. How I miss those Friday evenings. How almost always we would sing around the piano before supper. A tiny seed of rebellion had been growing in my heart, and now I lashed out to God. We were barely making ends meet. Our only car had broken down during the week, and we had to walk 3 miles along a dark highway to get home. We managed to pay for the repairs, but now we had no money until the end of the month, almost 2 weeks away. We managed to pay. Lord, I said, if I only had the assurance that you've led us here, that you wanted us to stay, I wouldn't mind the rest. I longed to hear God's voice, to hear from his very lips that we were meant to be here. I looked at the Bible next to me on the bench and thought how I would love to read something written just for me. I didn't want standard promises about God's leading and directed our paths. I wanted something personal. I snatched up the Bible and said, Lord, I need something personal, just for me. I knew all the promises in the Bible. There's about 3,000 of them. There's a lot of them there. And his promises are true. And I didn't feel any of them could speak to my need to give me the reassurance I needed that moment. I flipped it over defiantly, and my eyes fell on Psalms 45:10. Listen, my daughter, consider and give ear. Forget your people and your father's house. I sat in stunned silence. I felt God had spoken to me. He had not only spoken, but had called me daughter. Later, much later, when I reached for the text, it took a while to find it again. I read the verses before and after, and they made no sense to me at all. God had guided me to the very text in the Bible that I needed. After that, nothing mattered. Not the hardships, nor the difficulties, nor the trials. We were where God wanted us to be. We were still poor. We still had no furniture, no family, and no piano. But that was okay. Well, let me rephrase that. It was okay until I heard that a local radio station was going to give away a brand new Baldwin piano. Our very first piano that we ever bought was a Baldwin in Hawaii, about almost 60 years ago. Pastor was leaving there. We bought his piano. There would be a Christmas drawing. Oh, all I needed to do, they said, was send in a 3x5 card with my name and address on it. There would be a Christmas drawing, and there was a chance my name might be chosen. I had never been exposed to sweepstakes before and was totally innocent. But I'm not. I don't believe in it. It's not God's plan. But anyway, exceptions. I thought I had a shot at it and confidently sent in my card. By this time, I had found work as a receptionist in a car dealership. And when I mentioned it to my coworkers, they smiled and set me straight about sweepstakes. I became anxious then. I wanted that piano. I never wanted anything in my life. Like I would never wanted anything in my life. It represented everything Robert and I didn't have. All the hardships we'd endured, all the trials and difficulties congealed into one prize. I thought, if only I could have that piano. Lord, please make it happen. I made it a subject of prayer every day. I argued with God about the merits of my getting it over someone else who might not use it for His glory. As a pastor's wife, I need one, Lord, I said. I knew that otherwise we wouldn't be able to afford a piano for years. One night as I was praying, begging is a better word, the thought came to me. How was I planning to return tithe on such a valuable gift? I'd totally forgotten about that. The value of the piano was $4,000. In the 80s, that was a lot of money. For us, $400 tithe, the 10th, might just as well have been $40,000. And there was our second tithe. We had pledged an additional 10% to God for several reasons. There were so many needs in the church. We felt compelled to go the extra mile. $800 was out of the question. We wouldn't be able to do it. My prayers changed. I no longer begged God. Instead, I told Him that if He wanted us to have that piano, He would have to provide the funds for the tithe. I felt peace then, the peace that had eluded me when I begged and pleaded. I still prayed about it every night, but I now left it in His hands, whatever the outcome. The day of the drawing, I took a small radio to work. I had to hear my name being called in order to win. My co-workers smiled indulgently and reminded me that they'd been entering sweepstakes for years and had never won anything. Nevertheless, I was confident that God would perform a miracle. As it turned out, many prizes were being given out that day, including a satellite dish, an electronic keyboard, and other small items. The odds that my name would be drawn were slim, less so for the grand prize, the piano. Every time a name was called, I'd hold my breath, and I knew it wasn't my name. Finally, around noon, the DJ announced that the mayor of the city had arrived to draw the name for the grand prize. There was a pause, and then he read a name. It wasn't mine. I sat there totally deflated. I had been so sure. Then I felt ashamed. What right had I to ask God for such a gift? Weren't there more pressing needs in the world? There were hungry children in Somalia, wars, disease, and here I was asking for a piano. What presumption! Lord, forgive me, I said. Forgive my presumption. I reached over to turn the radio off and stopped. The winner has failed to call in, said the announcer. They gave them 5 minutes, I believe it is, to call in. So we'll have to draw another name. After a brief pause, he said, the person who lives at 420D North Main is my new winner. It's my address, I thought. Could someone else possibly have the same address? Nancy Costa. You have 5 minutes to call the radio station, he continued. I had written the number down, but I was having difficulty dialing it. My hand shook so much that I couldn't make my fingers land on the right numbers. After what seemed an eternity, in reality just a few seconds, I finally got through and was able to confirm that I had won. A few days later, a brand new piano arrived at my tiny apartment. Now, besides the rented couch and mattress, we had a shiny new piano. Everyone was amazed, my co-workers, our church family, our family overseas, and I was filled with an overwhelming sense of awe and gratitude for what God had done. There was still the small matter of tithe. Lord, remember the condition. I told him a few nights later, I still don't have the money for your tithe. You can see how sincere a woman she was. The next morning, the owner of the dealership called me into his office. He and his wife were an older couple, and every year, each employee got a frozen turkey as a Christmas gift, Christmas bonus. I had no idea what I was going to do with mine. Maybe give it to one of the needy families in my community. When I entered Mr. Clark's office, his wife was there, and they both looked quite pleased. They congratulated me on my prize and asked whether it was actually been delivered. They probably thought I might have fallen for a hoax. When I confirmed that it had, they told me they wanted to do something for me. They figured I would probably owe taxes on it, and they wanted to help me. They gave me a check for $450, enough to return tithe on the piano, and have $5 to spare. I was ecstatic. Still, I boldly told the Lord, you still have to find me the funds for the second tithe. I believe in the second tithe. I believe it works. The Lord blesses that second tithe. Gift to the Lord. You can't outgive him. Anyway, and he did. Starting that January, I received a pay raise of $50 a month, which I used to pay off my pledge of the second tithe. I learned some important lessons through these experiences. I learned that God is a personal God, that my prayers are not taken in the context of the whole world's needs. Each prayer is received and answered as if it were the only prayer, the only need. He gives that which he knows is best. I learned that God not only gives us what we need, he also gives us the desires of our heart. I've seen it happen many, many times. I learned that God is merciful. Despite our imperfections, despite our misguidedness and our lack of understanding, he is patient, even indulgent with his children. And that piano has provided me with so many opportunities to testify about what God has done for me. I've never felt impressed to pray for a sheep's sweepstakes again. I wanted to from time to time. Who doesn't want $1 million? But I never felt right about it. I believe the Holy Spirit impressed me to pray for that specific gift to teach me about God and His mercy, and to be able to share with others what God has done for me. More than 20 years have passed, but whenever I face a valley of trial, I still draw encouragement from that mountaintop experience. Yes, it was the worst of times, but it was also the best of times. God can best show us His glory in our darkest hour. Nancy Costa, administrative assistant at a radio, a television network, where her husband Robert is Hispanic Ministries coordinator. God bless you. And remember, God really cares for you and me.